Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be updating my TBR journal, adding in a bunch of new books that I've been hearing about. There's going to be a big handful of books for the month of December that I'm adding because everyone is releasing their best of the year lists. I can't help but add a bunch of books to my want to read list because I hear about so many amazing things, and of course these are all books that were spoken of very highly, so I'm excited to share those with you and also the creators that I've been watching and how much fun I've been having with my TBR journal. And I wanted to start the video with a little book haul, some books that I was gifted for Christmas that I'm excited to get to, and I'll get right into that now. This is Miss Major Speaks by Miss Major and Toshio Meronek. This is essentially an interview, so questions posed by Meronek to Miss Major, who is a very important person in the queer, trans liberation movement, and just overall a super inspiring, amazing person who I am very fond of, so I'm excited to get to Miss Major Speaks. Another book that I've been wanting to read for a very long time is Leila Khaled, Icon of Palestinian Liberation by Sarah Irving. This is actually a biography of Leila Khaled. Leila Khaled is an incredibly bold, brave Palestinian woman who has been an activist for decades and decades now, and most notoriously was a plane hijacker. She is someone who I've read different kind of things about and have always been very fascinated by. And if you want to know more about Leila Khaled and what she stands for, I absolutely recommend her memoir, My People Shall Live. This is one of my favorite books, texts of all time ever. It's so powerful and moving, and you can find this for free online. I then have Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. This is a book that I honestly don't really know much about at all, but I'm really eager to get to it. It's not as I expected. I've seen this book around a lot and just thought it was like maybe some, contemporary literary fiction. It never really piqued my interest, but I never looked into it. And this actually sounds very exciting, kind of part historical, part futuristic novel. I then have this beautiful copy of Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne. I reread the original Hunger Games trilogy this year, and I've yet to read Sunrise on the Reaping. I know everybody's really loving this, and I mean, Haymitch is absolutely one of my favorite characters, as he is to so many, so I'm excited to hear his story in this book, and also maybe watch the movie when it comes out. This next book I talked about in my last TBR journal update, and this is Surreal Spaces, The Life and Art of Leonora Carrington. And I'm so happy to have this copy of the book to show you because it's so gorgeous. I had no idea that there's tons of photos in here. There's full pages of artwork in here. So I'm so excited to be getting to read this physically out of this beautiful copy and really just get to experience all the artwork that is in here. This is a biography of Leonora Carrington. This is by Joanna Moorhead. I then have another book that I am pretty entirely unfamiliar with, and this is Under the Frog by Tibor Fischer. This is a Hungarian novel that was gifted to me by my Hungarian friend, and I'm excited to read this with her. This was a recommendation actually from her dad, who is not a super reader, but he is really fond of this book, and I know it follows young boys and basketball, and it is also historical fiction. This is set in the 1950s after World War II in Hungary. I think I will be reading a few pieces of Hungarian literature in the next year, especially because Laszlo Krasznahorkai has won the Nobel Prize, and he's someone who I'm very fascinated by but have not read anything by yet. I then have Grotesque by Natsuo Kirino. This is about women, sex workers, and violence against women. I know that this is a thriller and very dark. This would be my first book by this author. And then the final book I have is Ruth First and Joe Slovo in the War Against Apartheid by Alan Wieder. This is a biography of both Ruth First and Joe Slovo. They were husband and wife, and I was introduced to them through Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. That's where I first heard about them. And then this year I read 117 Days, which is Ruth First's prison letters from when she was imprisoned during the anti-apartheid movement. I just found myself wanting to know more about these two people. They were both white and activists in the anti-apartheid movement, both dedicated their life to this cause, and Ruth First actually was assassinated later in her life because of her political activism. So I'm excited to read more about them as a couple here and their efforts in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. That's my Christmas book haul. Now let's get to updating my TBR journal. If you are curious as to how my TBR journal works and how it's organized and things like that, please do watch my first TBR journal video where I explain that process. I am going to be making monthly updates on this journal as I add more things into it, and I'm just finding this is a really fun way to share things that have come onto my radar and also share with you the creators who I am listening to and enjoying their content from, and I hope you check out some of their channels as well as I mention them here. All right, we are back in the TBR journal, about to add a bunch of books in, and our very first one is going to be The Birds by Tarjei Vesaas. This is an author that I read earlier this year for the very first time, and I wasn't particularly thinking of reading another book by this author. However, I did really like the book that I read. I did read The Ice Palace, and I really liked that book, but I didn't really know where to go next with this author. Tarjei Vesaas is a Norwegian author who writes in Nynorsk. And this book, The Birds, is about a man who has mental illnesses. His sister is his primary caregiver and really the person who he is very deeply bonded to and is providing a lot of care for him. But his sister then begins to fall in love with the man, and she is now, splitting her time between her brother and this love interest in her life. This book I just heard talked about on Shelf Seeker's channel in their best books of the year. This is the first video I ever watched by them, and I was really impressed. I loved the list of books here and was really excited to hear about The Birds. Moving on to the ends, and another author that I have read from before. This is going to be Jane, a Murder by Maggie Nelson. Now, this is more so an author that I wasn't certain I would be returning to because I really struggled with the Argonauts. I feel like I wouldn't be able to communicate with her if I wanted to talk to her or even just form a question to know what to ask her so I could better understand her work. The Argonauts was difficult for me to consume, but there was just so much there that I was curious of. Jane is a memoir by Maggie Nelson, and it's actually exploring the death and murder of her aunt, who she was always compared to as a child and growing up, but is someone that she doesn't really know anything about as she wasn't present in her life. I do really like memoirs about grief and losing people. I read a lot of those this year, and this book I heard about from Candace in her best books of the year video, which I just have to say, Candace, I admire your candidness in your filming and approach to reading and talking about books. Your channel and vibe just gives the feel of talking to a friend, and I really do love that and appreciate that. It feels very refreshing to me. This is just one of some very interesting books that Candace talked about in her best books of the year. Crux by Gabriel Talent. This is something I'm kind of wary of. I am a rock climber. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing. That is my main hobby other than reading. This book is about two children. I think they're teenagers, and they become very close friends, especially because they are spending a lot of time bouldering together in Joshua Tree, which is a place that I love to visit and climb in. And I'm just really curious how climbing will be talked about and portrayed in a way that's accessible to those who maybe are unfamiliar with the sport. It really seems like this is a major plot point of the book. This is a new book. It's actually coming out next year in 2026. I did request a digital arc, so I'm hoping I'll be able to read and review this pretty soon for you guys, but just sounded pretty interesting to me. The other thing about this book that I'm a little wary of is that it follows two teenagers, so I'm curious as to if this will be a young adult novel or written in a way that is in that style, maybe with some young adult themes or tropes. That's not something I'm particularly interested in. But because of the climbing aspect of this book, I think I just have to read it. I really want to know. I heard about this book from the New York Times book review, which I love reading both on the website and listening to their podcast. Another book I heard about on the New York Times book review is Furious Minds. This is by Laura K. Field, and it is a nonfiction book about the making of the MAGA New Right. I know that it is focused on the so-called intellectuals within the MAGA movement. I do like reading books about politics, and whether that's about groups of people or individuals or different things of that sort. If you are interested in a book that talks about the rise of MAGA and this kind of new era of American conservatism, there is a book called Alt America. I read this a few years ago. I thought it was very good and just a very comprehensive history as to how we got to where we are today. Monsters in the Archives. This is by Caroline Bix. This is nonfiction and a mix of memoir and I think kind of a biography, essentially, of Stephen King. So this author has been granted access to Stephen King's archives and Stephen King himself to ask him about his work and his history and different things about him, which to me sounds very fascinating. This is coming out next year. Stephen King is an author who I think is just very important to my overall journey as a reader, given that he's my mom's favorite author. His books absolutely fill her house. She's read everything he's ever written. And some of his books were some of the first things I read as a young adult, as someone who could choose books for myself. And I found myself wanting to read those scary books. And I still really like to read scary books and things that are disturbing. And it's been fun to read his books and related books with my mom as well. So I hope we read this one together in the next year. This book I heard about from Books and Lala. She also has read so much of Stephen King's work, and I do believe her story is kind of the same as mine. Her mom was an avid Stephen King reader, and that kind of sparked that within her as well. And we're both people who aren't, like, we don't love Stephen King, you know? He isn't the best author I've ever read, ever, and I wouldn't consider him a favorite author, but just someone who is kind of a key part of my reading, which I think she might relate to as well. So I heard about that from her channel when she talked about some new releases coming out in the next year. Light Years by James Salter. This is fiction and a classic of literary fiction. It came out in 1975, and I never heard about this book until Anna Wallace began to talk about it on her channel. It ended up in her best books of the year and sounds like a very moving and touching book that I would like to read. Another book coming off of Anna Wallace's best of the year list is Such Times by Christopher Coe. I have never heard of this book again before Anna mentioned it. She's amazing for some kind of deep cuts. She reads a lot of older books, which I appreciate. And this is, I think, kind of a classic of queer literature. It's not super old. It's from the 1990s. Christopher Coe is another author who is from the East Coast, and his book is focused on New York. I believe New York City specifically, a setting that I do enjoy kind of indulging in. The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry. I'm sure I've read Berry before, but I believe only individual poems. This is a collection of poetry that is about nature, and this was suggested by one of the viewers on my most recent video where I read some poetry, I read some nature poetry. That is a specific kind of poetry that I find myself gravitating towards, as I want poetry to feel relaxing. I don't want to feel strained and confused, and I find nature writing usually, very non-confusing. It's especially literal, and it's relaxing to read about the natural world. It feels very grounding. So I think this will be a great addition to poetry on nature. Walking Practice by Dalkey Min. This is a horror book that I know is especially disturbing, but I don't really want to know much more than that because I do like being surprised. I was introduced to this book by Anton Her through Nathan Snook's channel. Nathan did kind of a chat interview, if you want to call it that, little sit down with Anton Her, a translator, and this book was mentioned and piqued my interest. And then, because I was enjoying that chat between Anton Her and Nathan so much, I had to add Anton Her's own book, Toward Eternity, to my list. This is a dystopian sci-fi book. Anton Her is also from South Korea, but he writes in English. As I mentioned, he's a translator, so he's translated some very famous South Korean novels to English. I think the most well-known is probably Cursed Bunny, which is something I am curious to read eventually as well. Mumbo Jumbo by Ishmael Reed. This is a classic of American literature that deals with race. It's from the 1970s. And I heard about this book on a channel called Illiterate in his best books of the year. Also amazing, amazing list in general there. So many books I'd never heard of or were just so fascinating and just wonderful picks. Lots and lots to consider there to read. So thank you to Illiterate for this recommendation. In the Eye of the Wild by Nastasia Martin. This is nonfiction and it is a memoir about the author's experience being mauled by a bear. A very unique experience. And this is kind of about her thought process after that event happened, how unbelievable and life-changing that was. It did disfigure and scar her face. Martin is a French anthropologist who was basically doing field work when this happened. This bear attack happened in Siberia. She spent a lot of time in the hospital and a lot of time healing from this attack. It's funny, I never heard about this book before, but then I heard it mentioned twice, nearly back to back. The first mention was from Book Bench's channel, where he discussed all the books he read this year. And then it was subsequently mentioned by Candace in her best books of the year, who I spoke about earlier. You Can't Catch Death. This is by Anth Brodigan. This I wanted to read after I finished another Brodigan book. I read The Abortion just this last month in December, and that was my second Brodigan, and I realized I need to learn more about this man. And his daughter wrote a sort of biography memoir about her father. Brodigan's really a fascinating guy, and his works are very fascinating as well. There's just this sense of melancholia over all of his works. He ended up taking his own life, which is very sad and tragic. He had a life that was kind of imbued with alcoholism and sadness and mental illness and struggles, and I'm curious what his daughter has to say about him and what she can reveal about his work, why he wrote the things that he wrote. Hopefully just shed some light on him, as he also seemed quite a bit elusive as well. The Anarchist Who Shared My Name. This is by Pablo Martin Sanchez. This is literary fiction, but it's kind of based on like real events at the same time. Our author here, Pablo Martin Sanchez, Googled his own name and found someone else sharing the same name who was an anarchist and a very fascinating person. And then he decided to write a fiction novel about that. I think it's an interesting situation, coming across someone who shares your exact same name, and for whatever reason, you now feel tied to this person. You have something so important that is in common between the two of you. And what will you do with that information? Maybe write a book about it in this case. Sanchez is from Spain, and his book is originally written in Spanish. I heard about this on the channel Life on Books, specifically from Tony when he did his bookshelf tour very recently. Amazing video. I love looking at people's shelves, and he has some of the best looking shelves, I think, in my opinion. A lot of unique books, a lot of translated literature, and so many good recommendations came from that video. We'll follow up with a couple more from that as well here. China Dream by Ma Jin. This is fiction, and it's tagged as sci-fi, and I actually don't really know anything about this book, other than, as I mentioned, Life on Books. In the bookshelf tour, Tony said this was one of his favorite books. I have particularly really enjoyed some books by some Chinese authors recently, and I want to continue with exploring more literature from China, and this sounds like a great place to go. And then one more from that bookshelf tour, I have Fury by Cleo Mendoza. This is a horror novel that came out in 2021. Mendoza is from Mexico and writes in Spanish. And this, again, a book that was mentioned by multiple people that I'm talking about here. This also appeared on Candace's Best Books of the Year, so a double recommendation here. It sounds pretty disturbing, which is a kind of book that I don't shy away from. The Practice, the Horizon, and the Chain. This is by Sophia Samatar. This is science fiction, and this book came out just in 2024, so pretty recent publication. And I heard about this on Literature Science Alliance's channel. I always come back to Angela's channel. She's one of the first people that I started watching on BookTube, and we honestly don't really read much alike at all. She reads very heavily on science fiction and fantasy, which I typically do not, but she has some amazing recommendations that I can't help but want to read as well. This came up on her Best Books of the Year and is a science fiction that deals with education and privilege within education, which sounded pretty great to me. And especially because it came from high praises from her, who is in the world of education as well. Positive Obsession by Susanna M. Morris. This is nonfiction, and it's actually a biography of Octavia Butler. This book just came out this year in 2025, and it's a book I actually saw because of a Goodreads list, which most of those Goodreads lists I think are pretty garbage. I don't really find much that I'm interested in. It's a lot of books that I've already heard about, and just particularly is stuff I usually skim over. However, a Octavia Butler biography sounds pretty good to me. Octavia Butler is an amazing author, science fiction. I've read 3 books by her now and intend to read more. I think I'll keep going with her, honestly, until I've completed all of her works, because I find her so innovative in her writing and ideas. If you want to start with her, the Earthseed duology is a great place to go, but I honestly would recommend Kindred as a very good starting piece because it is a standalone. The Changeling by Victor Lavelle. This is fiction, a kind of blending of fantasy, horror, literary. It's a retelling of, a changeling, which is about a child who is kind of taken, swapped at birth, and replaced with a mischievous, perhaps evil being. And I heard about this through essentially reading like a preview to this story, I think. I'm reading Exo Orpheus, which is a short story collection. I actually have it right here. This is like 50 short stories. They're all retellings of classic myths of various different backgrounds. Victor Lavelle wrote a changeling story in here, and at the end of that story, he then left a little note that said, "This is a part of something bigger that I'm working on and want to release, and this predates the Changeling's publication, so I can only assume that that short story then became The Changeling." And I'm not really enjoying this collection of stories, but Victor Lavelle's was the best one so far, and I did enjoy his story, so wanted to kind of read where that story took him, and as he expanded that to a whole novel. And the last book we'll talk about here is Work Like Any Other. This is by Virginia Reeves. It's fiction, and it is a historical literary novel set in 1920s America, I believe in Alabama, in deep poverty. It's about a family trying to overcome a lot of difficulties. And this book was talked about on the channel Supposedly Fun. That is Greg's channel. His husband Joel is also featured there regularly. They're people I've watched for years now. Another channel that I began to watch right when I started enjoying BookTube and seeing what was out there, and I love their recommendations. They have a very casual and fun and just a channel that really feels very full of love, which I enjoy. I recommend a very broad variety of books, fiction, nonfiction, things that are happy, feel good, a lot of serious books, classics, different things like that. A great channel if you are someone like me who reads from a lot of different time periods, different authors, and different genres as well. That is going to conclude the December update of my TBR journal. I'm also going to go through here and mark the books that I have read in December. That is probably going to be the next video you'll see from me, is my December wrap-up. But do believe that that best books of the year video will be coming soon from me, which I'm very eager to share with you all. Thank you so much for being here, and let me know if any of these books have piqued your interest or you have read and recommend any of them to me.